Good afternoon. My name's Jeanette Atkins. I'm with the National Organization for Victim Assistance, and we are a proud partner in the program of the Improving Community Preparedness to Assist Victims of Mass Violence and Domestic Terrorism. It's a training and technical assistance program, which we will refer to for simplicity as ICPTTA, or ICP for short. I'm going to turn it over quickly to Tara Hughes, who is the director of the ICPTTA grant, which has been provided by the Office for Victims of Crime.
Thanks, Jeanette. So good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. We are here today to talk to you about some specific trainings that NOVA is doing in partnership with the program. So my job today is really to introduce you to the program. And the program is funded to augment existing emergency response plans to include really comprehensive and reality-based victim care after mass violence and domestic terrorism. And we do that through a number of different methods, one of which is training. The other is technical assistance. And we can do that for a small piece of your plan. We can do it for your entire plan. And augment your plan with mass violence and domestic terrorism specific victim services. So our program, I'm going to talk a little bit more after Jeanette talks a little bit more about NOVA, but this program is really based in experience of ourselves and our partners. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jeanette, and she's going to tell you a little bit about NOVA and its experience.
Thank you very much, Tara. If you're not familiar with NOVA, or the National Organization for Victim Assistance, one of our primary missions is to train victim advocates across the country and actually internationally in helping those victims of crime and crisis. NOVA has a rich history in providing services after mass violence, natural disasters, as well as man-made disasters since the late 80s. And we hope to bring some of that experience to you all because in each of those responses over all these years, we had the opportunity to meet with communities just like yours and found some of them somewhat prepared, many of them not prepared at all. And certainly the charge being given to organizations that might not be familiar with incidents that involve criminal acts. So I think that that's the wonderful part of this program that OVC has charged under the ICP program for us to connect those traditional EMA programs, the Red Cross, with victim services, because many of you are already very well equipped to provide victim services, but may not have done it in coordination together in the aftermath of a very unexpected and sudden event of mass violence or terrorism. So NOVA's adapted our trainings that we have been providing for years to focus on these certain response areas that we feel will fit into your larger plan of response to something like this should it hit your community.
So it's back to me, and one of the things that we want to help ground this program in is that experience that we have with NOVA and with our other partners, but also with our consultants. So we have 20 consultants who work with us, and we have all come together to create what we are calling the 16 best practices in planning for mass violence and domestic terrorism. So you see them on your screen right now. And the first 3 are really how to plan and sort of pull things together prior to an event. During that time, you're going to plan for all the rest of the 16 best practices. But starting with number 4, we're really looking at, in many ways, a chronological use of the work that is done and the planning that you have done as a community to meet the needs in different time periods of a response and for different specific topic areas. And so you'll see a family and friends reception notification center in there. You'll see financial donation management. There's lots of different ways to do this. And NOVA, we have asked to be very specific in what they will be training in. And as Jeanette said, it's about linking emergency management and traditional responders to victim advocates, because mass violence and domestic terrorism are both criminal acts, and there are differences. And so understanding those differences and understanding how to work together as a team. Jeanette and I both have lots of examples of where we have showed up early in these responses, and we have very good teams on both sides, the emergency management first response side and the victim advocate side. But what isn't happening is that they're not working together, and they're not working jointly and really in a coherent kind of a way. And victims suffer because of that. So this program is really about that connection. And we do it based in these 16 best practices. So Jeanette's going to focus on a couple of them in this intro, and she'll highlight those in a minute. But just know that we are here and we can help with all of these. And we'll talk about contact information at the end. So back to you, Jeanette.
Thank you, Tara. And the really important thing to remember is these are actually the primary areas that in our experience, and Tara and I can speak to that firsthand, that communities are either lacking in, or as Tara mentioned, they may have very good planning in one area that's familiar to them, but not in another area. And I'm going to just overview for you what the training would touch on for the criminal justice system victim support, which is number 15 under the best practice areas, and the community behavioral health response, which is number 11. Now, I'll just overview these for you so that you get a better idea of what the full training would provide for your community. If we look at the criminal justice system victim support, this is where we found, for example, in Las Vegas, when the Family Assistance Center was being established to help all the victims of the shooting in Las Vegas several years ago. The EMA program and the emergency response plan that was in place in Las Vegas didn't actually include the victim support piece. And in fact, when our colleague, Ellen Green, showed up at the meeting from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department with the charge from her chief to take care of all of the victims in that mass violence incident, they didn't really understand what victim assistance was. And this is the whole crux of this program, is to provide that bridge between you all who provide traditionally victim support in the aftermath of a criminal case with those people in your community who are very in tune with what to do in a community-wide disaster, but may not have any knowledge whatsoever of a criminal case, the importance of how it's handled, and most importantly, for this particular program, for the victim support that is absolutely necessary. So we will be covering that. And each of these has a question at the top that you can ask yourself in your community. Does your plan include how to support a large volume of victims and families, that case as it moves through the criminal justice system? And I would say for those of you who have experience in criminal justice that might be viewing this, or those that know of a victim assistance program in your community, they have expertise in the area of providing services to those victimized by crime in the aftermath of a criminal incident. They hit the ground running actually when victim advocates were invited in by the Attorney General of Nevada to provide support, because they're very used to knowing what to do with crime victims, providing crisis intervention, and providing information about victims' compensation, for example, something that the EMA office may not be familiar with at all. And that's just a quick example. The thing that we would be talking to you all about, if you are already providing victim support in your community, you may not, however, have had an incident as large as Las Vegas, in the shooting that happened at the Harvest Festival, or a situation like Oklahoma City, an act of terrorism, and the victim advocates were handed all of these crime victims, literally the victim of this terrorist attack. So we're all very good maybe at focusing on a family, maybe even a multiple homicide case and all those family members, but not necessarily providing it to a huge group of survivors or their family members. So we'll be talking about the role of the victim advocate in the 24-hour crisis response. NOVA has a particular portion of its community crisis response training that is called companioning, very familiar to crime victim advocates, because in the companioning piece, you will walk people through all of the services in a family assistance center, which is covered in another training, but also then providing that criminal justice victim support. We'll be looking at some of these topics like understanding it from the perspective of prosecutorial advocacy. And I'm going to make a point here that we will touch on in the training, but in the Harvest concert shooting, the perpetrator ended up ending his own life. So there was no criminal prosecution in that case that involved the perpetrator, which was actually a blessing, if you will, for the local community there. But we will be talking about those cases and using examples for you where the perpetrator survives what has happened and prosecution is pending. So we'll be talking about the long-term impact of trauma on the victims involved in that mass violence incident or terrorist attack. We'll also be looking at skill-based intervention just based upon the skills you already have in victim support in your communities of those individuals who are providing that, but also taking those skills and applying them to a new situation where there are multiple victims and possibly long-term prosecution issues because of what may be involved in that. We'll be looking at the practical issues for those multiple victims in that criminal justice process. And I think back to Oklahoma City, for example, the bombing and a terrorist attack there that involved multiple family members of the victims who were killed in that terrorist attack and those who survived, and how they made accommodations just simply for them to have the right to be present at that trial and to observe that trial. So we'll be using examples like that. And we'll be looking at the use of post-trauma resources, which is absolutely crucial to not only providing the 24-hour crisis response in the immediate aftermath in your community should an incident like this occur, but also ongoing so that you then transfer those survivors into good hands for people who know how to help them deal with post-trauma issues that they will be having or long-term stress issues. In this training, we will also be looking at the behavioral health response. And I can tell you, and I think Tara would agree with me, that in response to these incidents of mass violence or a terrorist attack, like something as large as 9/11, or at the time what we thought was bigger than all of us, Oklahoma City, behavioral health representatives come out in droves to help. They are skilled. They know what to do when people have suffered trauma. And so it's a natural inclination for your community members to want to come out and help and offer their expertise. So we will be looking at, they have the skills to provide one-on-one ongoing counseling type support for people, but do they have the training to apply those same skills in the disaster, in a disaster or mass violence response? Are they trained and are they available in your community? We'll look at identification of local behavioral health services and those responders, because they are going to be a very good resource list for those that you're serving, and maybe a part of providing that direct services for them. We plan in pre-crisis training, including local behavioral health responders. It's extremely important. In fact, we often go into a community and NOVA will provide, and this is just an example, there are other resources out there for crisis planning, but because we're a partner in this program, we would be providing our 3-hour down and dirty, it's called, or it's really a condensed version of our 3-day NOVA basic crisis response training. So that is always available, even on site in the aftermath of something. And then we would be reviewing NOVA's companioning services and training behavioral health responders in providing that as well. Because if they are on site and want to help, they can provide a one-on-one psychological crisis intervention, as well as walking those survivors or family members through the services that are available at a family assistance center, for example. And then we'll actually also be covering in this training activation, deployment, and response. So people understand you're being put on standby right now because we don't want convergence. And Tara and I could both tell you it's absolute chaos in the immediate aftermath of one of these incidents, not to even mention something as large as Las Vegas, Oklahoma City, or 9/11. And I use those as examples because I think everybody heard about those and knows about those. But we'll be looking at deployment of local crisis response teams, your team, if you decide to create a team in pre-crisis planning in your community, which we hope you will. And we would also talk about the use of state, national support resources if necessary, which was needed in the aftermath of Las Vegas, and Tara was there and I think would agree that having victim advocates come in from around the country to provide that additional support for all those family members, they could hit the ground running. They knew what they were doing. They just had to acclimate to Nevada and California and Arizona, where many of the victims or their survivors were from. We'll actually also be talking about the use of behavioral health staff, how crucial they can be as volunteers in responding to mass violence under the direction, which they may not be used to, of whoever might be in charge with the authority over the incident. Usually law enforcement in the actual investigation, like FBI, but the EMA or the governor's office was in charge of the Family Assistance Center in New Jersey after 9/11 when we were there. But local victim assistance, the Red Cross, etc. So we'll be talking about the use of behavioral health staff and how important they are. One of the things that we have noticed that has been extremely crucial is having a table at the Family Assistance Center and then ongoing in the Resiliency Center, which it may evolve from a table at the Family Assistance Center with literature that behavioral health finds important for people to understand the trauma that they've experienced. But when it may evolve to the Resiliency Center, where you actually have behavioral mental health on site to provide direct services, some of those post-trauma services that we'll be talking about as well. Kind of a quick recap of what this training might involve, and I'll turn it over to Tara now so she can tell you how to access the training.
Sure, and I'm going to say just before I move into that when we talk about behavioral health, the two things that are really important that you'll get from this training are the idea that these are unique tasks that you're going to be asked to do. This is not the normal thing that you have done. So you may be a trauma therapist who does a 50-minute hour in an office or works in a hospital, and the skills you need will come from that, but the tasks you're asked to do will be different. And so that orientation will come from this training. And that's really, really important. And the other thing is about the unique relationships. Jeanette, if you go back one slide and you look at the list where it has emergency management, it has FBI, local law enforcement, Red Cross, all of these people that you don't normally interact with. And in these situations, those relationships and how you're working together. So a Red Cross person may be doing the exact same thing as a victim advocate, because in this situation, there are hundreds or thousands of people who need that companioning piece. So it's about sort of understanding all of that, which is unique to these kinds of responses. So, okay, now we'll get to the training piece. So these trainings are accessible through this program, and you see on the screen an email that you can access and a phone number that you can call to request these trainings. These are trainings that NOVA will do live. They will do in person if we are able to travel without COVID restrictions, or they will do them live online, but they will be done and tailored to your community. So we are looking for you guys to give us a call and tell us what you're interested in. You know, if you are a community that is anticipating a trial, maybe it's that piece that you want. If you're really just at a bigger planning stage, maybe it's the behavioral health piece that you want and how to link that into your larger response. Also just to know that that email that is on the screen is also available if you're interested in the overall program and your community is looking to really augment that full plan. You can also access us through that.
And each one of these trainings, I will say in conclusion today, will provide you with resources that we use and rely on in response to mass violence and terrorism. And these are just a couple of examples for you that you would receive that information as well. So I do know that as a partner, again, NOVA is very proud to be involved with the ICPTTA program. And we look forward to helping your community in any way we might be able to do so through the use of these resources, the training, and also our experience in response to just these types of incidents.